Harold Bennett walked through the gleaming corridors of Earth Defense Station Omega-7. Carrying his old leather briefcase, the 78-year-old man moved slowly, but with purpose. His weathered hands gripped the case that held 40 years of quantum engineering notes. The younger engineers barely looked up as he passed. Their eyes stayed focused on holographic displays, showing the new quantum defense grid. Harold had built the first version of this technology decades ago, but now the young people called his work Primitive Commander Lisa Wright met Harold at the main engineering bay. She was a stern woman in her 40s, with short brown hair and calculating eyes. The commander shook his hand briefly, then led him to his assigned workstation. Rebecca Davis, the chief engineer, looked up from her console. Her face showed clear annoyance at seeing the old man. She was 45 and had run the engineering department for 10 years. Rebecca believed the station needed cutting-edge minds, not ancient history. Our Amy Foster approached them with confident steps. The 35-year-old xenobiologist was brilliant and knew it. Her red hair was pulled back tightly and her green eyes held no warmth. Amy had published dozens of papers on alien communication and thought she knew everything. Harold set down his briefcase and opened it slowly. Inside were handwritten notebooks filled with equations and diagrams. The young engineers gathered around and began to whisper among themselves. Some pointed at his old paper notes and laughed quietly. Amy picked up one of his notebooks and flipped through it. Her expression grew more dismissive with each page. She read aloud some of his theories about quantum consciousness and harmonic resonance patterns. The other engineers joined her laughter. Lieutenant Katie Morgan watched from across the room. The 28-year-old communications officer felt uncomfortable with how the others treated Harold. She had read about his early work and knew he had pioneered much of their current technology. Rebecca Davis spoke first about the defense grid. She explained how their new quantum areas could stop any known weapon technology the system used, crystalline matrices that could shift energy frequencies in real time. Harold listened carefully and nodded occasionally. Air Foster then presented her communication protocols. She had developed new ways to send messages across vast distances using quantum entanglement. Amy was proud of her work and spoke with confidence about reaching other civilizations. Harold asked if he could examine the quantum resonance readings. Rebecca rolled her eyes but brought up the data streams on the main display. The old engineer studied the patterns carefully, while the others waited impatiently. Something in the readings caught his attention. Harold pointed to small fluctuations in the quantum field that appeared random to everyone else. He suggested these might be natural harmonics created by consciousness itself. The room fell silent for a moment. Foster laughed loudly and called his idea ancient pseudoscience. She explained that consciousness could not affect quantum fields in any measurable way. The other engineers nodded in agreement and returned to their own work. Harold tried to explain his theory further. He had spent decades studying how living minds could create quantum resonance patterns. The old engineer believed consciousness itself was a form of quantum energy that could be detected and measured. Rebecca Davis cut him off sharply. She said the station needed real science, not fairy tales from the past, the chief engineer told Harold. His job was to provide historical context, not to interfere with actual research. The morning continued with more presentations about the defense systems. Harold sat quietly and took notes in his old notebooks while the others worked on their advanced computers. He used pencil and paper. During lunch break, Katie Morgan approached Harold. She sat next to him in the mess hall and asked about his early research. The young woman was genuinely interested in learning from his experience. Harold explained how he had discovered quantum consciousness patterns 40 years ago. Back then, the technology was too primitive to fully understand what he had found. Now, with better equipment, the patterns should be clearer. Katie asked why the others dismissed his work so quickly. Harold smiled sadly and said that each generation thinks they invented everything. The old engineer understood that progress required building on the past, not throwing it away. In the afternoon, Harold noticed more fluctuations in the quantum readings. The patterns were becoming stronger and more organized. He tried to point this out to Rebecca, but she was busy with system diagnostics. Dar Foster was working on long-range sensors, trying to detect any alien signals in space. She used the most advanced equipment available, but found only empty silence. Amy was frustrated that her sophisticated methods showed nothing. Harold suggested they might be looking for the wrong type of signal. He explained that advanced civilizations might use quantum consciousness rather than electromagnetic radiation. The idea was met with more laughter and dismissive comments as evening approached. Harold continued studying the quantum fluctuations. The patterns reminded him of something from his early research. He pulled out an old notebook and compared the current readings to his hand-drawn charts. The similarity was unmistakable. The fluctuations matched theoretical patterns he had calculated decades ago. These were not random quantum noise, but organized consciousness signatures. Someone or something was trying to communicate. Tried one more time to get the attention of the engineering team. He approached Commander Wright and explained what he had discovered. Lisa listened politely, but her expression showed she thought he was confused. Rebecca Davis overheard the conversation and intervened. She told the commander that Harold was seeing patterns that did not exist. The chief engineer suggested the old man was having trouble adapting to modern technology. Dar Foster joined the discussion and agreed with Rebecca. Amy said that quantum consciousness was impossible, according to all known physics. She recommended that Harold stick to his historical consultant role and leave real science to the experts. Harold returned to his workstation, feeling defeated but not discouraged. He had been right about quantum consciousness before, and he knew he was right now. The old engineer continued monitoring the fluctuations throughout the night as the next morning approached. The quantum readings suddenly spiked dramatically. Every sensor on the station registered massive energy signatures at the edge of the solar system. Something enormous had just appeared in space. Commander Wright rushed to the main display and stared at the readings. A vessel larger than anything humanity had ever built was moving slowly toward Earth. The ship defied all known physics and showed no response to communication attempts. Harold looked at the quantum signatures and felt his heart race. The patterns he had been tracking for days were now 1,000 times stronger. The consciousness signals were coming from that alien ship. The old engineer realized that everything he had tried to tell them was about to be proven true. The alien vessel hung in space like a dark mountain against the stars. Its surface seemed to shift and flow, as if made of liquid metal. The ship was 15 kilometers long and showed no recognizable design patterns. Admiral Grace Thompson arrived at the station within hours. The 55-year-old commander of Earth Defense Force had gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Grace immediately took control of the situation and ordered all available ships to intercept Dr. Helen Price came, with the admiral bringing her expertise in quantum physics. The 40-year-old scientist had short black hair and wore thick glasses. Helen was known for her careful approach to new theories. The alien ship moved steadily toward Earth, but at a slow pace that would take several days to reach the inner system. Admiral Thompson ordered the fleet to form defensive positions while maintaining safe distances. Rebecca Davis worked frantically to boost the quantum defense grid. The chief engineer believed their barriers could stop any weapon, but she had never tested them against technology. This advanced Dr. Foster tried every communication method known to humanity. She sent radio signals, mathematical sequences, musical patterns, and even visual displays. Nothing produced any response from the alien vessel. Harold watched the quantum readings from his workstation. The consciousness patterns were now so strong they overwhelmed the sensors. The old engineer had never seen anything like these signatures. Katie Morgan assisted with communication attempts, but noticed something strange in the quantum background noise. The patterns seemed almost musical, as if someone was humming a complex tune. Admiral Thompson called a meeting of all senior staff. The main conference room filled with officers, scientists, and engineers. Everyone looked worried as they studied the approaching vessel. Grace explained that Earth had less than 3 days before the alien ship reached orbit. She wanted options for communication. defense or evacuation. The Admiral made it clear that surrender was not acceptable. Foster presented her communication efforts. She had tried every known method without success. Amy suggested the aliens might be too advanced to notice human attempts. At contact, Rebecca Davis reported on defensive preparations. The quantum barriers were at maximum strength, and all weapon systems were ready. The chief engineer believed they could damage the alien ship if necessary. Fr. Price offered her analysis of the vessel structure. Her quantum scans showed the ship was made of materials that should not exist. Helen could not understand how something so large could move without visible propulsion. Harold raised his hand slowly and asked to speak. The room fell quiet as all eyes turned to the old engineer. Admiral Thompson nodded for him to continue. Harold explained that the aliens were already communicating, but not through electromagnetic signals. The consciousness patterns he had detected were attempts at quantum contact. Amy Foster interrupted and said quantum consciousness was impossible. She repeated her earlier arguments about the lack of scientific evidence for such phenomena. Price looked thoughtful and asked Harold to explain his theory further. Helen had heard rumors of his early work, but never read his original research. Harold opened his old notebook and showed the patterns he had been tracking. The quantum fluctuations matched his theoretical models for consciousness-based communication perfectly. Katie Morgan supported Harold by showing the musical patterns she had noticed in the background signals. The communications officer had been studying his notes and beginning to understand his methods. Admiral Thompson asked if Harold could actually communicate with the aliens. The old engineer said he needed access to the main quantum array and permission to modify the equipment. Rebecca Davis protested that letting Harold touch the quantum systems could damage their only defense. The chief engineer feared his outdated methods would cause system failures. Dr. Price examined Harold's quantum equations more carefully. Helen began to see mathematical elegance in his consciousness theories that she had not expected. The alien ship continued its approach while the debate continued. Admiral Thompson finally decided to let Harold attempt communication. She ordered Rebecca to provide whatever assistance he needed. Harold and Katie worked together to modify the quantum array. The old engineer used techniques he had developed 40 years ago, but had never been able to test properly. Rebecca watched nervously as Harold made changes to her carefully calibrated systems. The chief engineer was certain he would break something important. Dr. Price helped Harold understand the modern equipment while he explained his theories to her. Helen began to appreciate the sophistication of his consciousness models. The modifications took 12 hours to complete. Harold had to rebuild several circuit pathways using design principles that predated current technology. When they activated the modified array, something incredible happened. The quantum readings suddenly organized into clear harmonic patterns. The random noise became structured music. Harold adjusted the frequency harmonics using his handwritten calculations. The patterns grew stronger and more complex, as if someone was learning to speak. Dr. Price stared at her instruments in amazement. The quantum fields were behaving exactly as Harold had predicted. Consciousness was indeed affecting reality at the quantum level. A new voice seemed to whisper through the quantum array, though no sound was actually made. The presence felt ancient and vast, like standing before an ocean of thoughts. Harold concentrated on the harmonic patterns and tried to send a simple mathematical sequence. The response came immediately as the alien consciousness echoed his pattern back perfectly. Katie monitored the communication attempts and noticed the alien patterns were growing more sophisticated. The entity was learning human mathematical concepts at incredible speed. Dr. Foster watched in shock as everything she thought she knew about physics crumbled. The impossible was happening right before her eyes, and she could not deny the evidence. Admiral Thompson ordered all defensive systems to stand down. She realized they were dealing with intelligence beyond human understanding, and hostility would be soon. Alien consciousness began sending more complex patterns that included images and concepts. Harold worked to interpret the quantum messages with help from Katie and Dr. Price. The first clear message was surprisingly simple. The aliens identified themselves as explorers from distant stars, who had traveled for countless centuries, Harold managed to send a response, introducing humanity as inhabitants of Earth. The quantum conversation was slow and difficult, but both sides were learning. Price worked to understand how consciousness could affect quantum fields. Her scientific worldview was changing as she witnessed phenomena that should be impassively. Alien ship slowed its approach and took position at the edge of the solar system. The gesture seemed peaceful, as if waiting for permission to come closer. Harold received another message that chilled him to the bone. The aliens spoke of preservation and testing civilizations. The old engineer realized humanity was being judged. Admiral Thompson demanded to know what the aliens wanted. Harold translated as best he could, but the concepts were beyond human experience. The consciousness patterns grew darker as the aliens explained their purpose. They preserved worthy civilizations by storing their knowledge and minds. The process was permanent. Harold understood with growing horror that preservation meant the end of human physical existence. The aliens collected consciousness like specimens in a vast mental museum. He tried to send questions about alternatives, but the alien responses were firm. Their decision about humanity would be made soon based on what they observed. The old engineer realized that his ability to communicate with them might be humanity only. Hope he needed time to understand their criteria for judgment. Harold worked through the night to improve the quantum communication system. The alien consciousness was patient, but he could sense its vast intelligence studying. Humanity navigator Sophia Clark joined the communication team, bringing her expertise in stellar cartography. The 30-year-old officer had blonde hair and blue eyes that reflected her curiosity about the universe. The alien ship began transmitting more complex patterns that Harold slowly learned to interpret. Each message revealed more about the visitors and their terrifying mission. Price assisted Harold with the quantum mathematics while trying to understand how consciousness could exist as pure energy. Helen had abandoned her previous beliefs about physics. The aliens called themselves the Kethmori Collective and explained they were the merged minds of billions of beings from a dying galaxy. They had traveled across space for millions of years. Harold translated their story. With growing dread, the Kethmori had watched countless civilizations destroy themselves through war, ignorance, or environmental collapse. Their solution was preservation. They collected the consciousness of worthy species before destruction could claim them. The process involved extracting minds and storing them within their ship. Katie monitored the quantum channels and noticed the alien patterns were becoming more insistent. The Kethmori seemed to be making preparations for something important. Dr. Foster watched the impossible communication in stunned silence. Her entire understanding of science had been shattered in just 2 days. Amy struggled to accept what she was witnessing. The Kethmori revealed that their ship contained millions of preserved minds from dead worlds. Each consciousness existed in a quantum matrix that sustained them forever. Harold asked about the criteria for preservation and received an answer that made his blood run cold. The aliens judged civilizations by how they treated knowledge and wisdom. They had been observing humanity for decades and were disappointed by what they saw: young people dismissing the old, experienced minds being cast aside. The irony was not lost on Harold. He had been mocked and ignored for his outdated ideas, yet those same ideas had enabled first contact with advanced aliens. Sophia Clark studied the star charts the aliens provided, showing the locations of preserved civilizations. Each marker represented an entire species that no longer existed in physical form. The Kethmori explained that preservation was an honor reserved for races that showed potential. They believed consciousness was more valuable than physical existence. Harold tried to argue that humanity deserved a chance to prove itself, but the aliens had already made their preliminary judgment. Earth would be preserved within days. Dr. Price worked desperately to understand the alien technology. Helen hoped to find some weakness or alternative, but the Kethmori were beyond human comprehension. The alien consciousness grew more personal as it focused on Harold individually. The collective was intrigued by his ability to use quantum consciousness techniques. They revealed that his theories were correct, and that advanced civilizations always discovered consciousness-based communication. Harold had stumbled onto fundamental truths. The Kethmori offered Harold a choice. He could join them willingly and help preserve human knowledge, or they would take humanity by force. Harold realized this was both an honor and a trap. The aliens respected his wisdom but expected him to betray his own species. Katie pleaded with Harold not to abandon humanity. The young officer had come to respect the old engineer and believed he was their only hope. The alien ship began moving closer to Earth. While maintaining the quantum dialogue, the massive vessel showed no signs of aggression, but its intent was clear. Admiral Thompson demanded updates on the negotiation. Grace was prepared to fight, but knew that human weapons would be useless against such advanced technology. Harold asked the Kethmori about alternatives to preservation. The aliens seemed confused by the question, as if they had never considered other options. He explained that humanity might be willing to prove themselves worthy of continued existence. The old engineer proposed a test that would demonstrate human potential. The Kethmori were intrigued by this suggestion. They had encountered countless civilizations, but none had ever proposed an alternative to preservation. Harold suggested that humans could show they valued both old wisdom and new knowledge by working together across generations. The test would prove humanity's unique strength. Dr. Foster finally spoke up and admitted that Harold had been right about quantum consciousness. Amy acknowledged that her arrogance had blinded her to important truths. Sir Becca Davis also apologized for dismissing Harold theories. The chief engineer realized that combining old and new methods might create better solutions. The Kethmori agreed to consider a test, but warned that failure would result in immediate preservation. They would design a challenge that required both wisdom and innovation. Harold accepted the terms, knowing it was humanity's only chance. The old engineer felt the weight of his species' survival resting on his shoulders. Though aliens transmitted the test parameters through the quantum link, the challenge involved creating a stable quantum bridge between human and alien consciousness. The task required understanding both classical quantum theory and advanced consciousness manipulation. No single human could solve it. Alone, Harold gathered his team, including Katie, Dr. Price, Sophia, and even Dr. Foster and Rebecca. They would need every available mind to meet the alien challenge. The Kethmori gave them 48 hours to complete the test. The ship positioned itself near Earth and began scanning for suitable quantum resonance points. Harold opened his oldest notebooks and began explaining the fundamental principles of consciousness-based physics. The young scientists listened with new respect. R. Price combined Harold theories with modern quantum mathematics, while Katie coordinated between the different approaches. Helen began to see the elegant connections. Sophia used her navigation skills to calculate the precise quantum coordinates needed for the bridge. The stellar cartographer worked closely with Harold. Old star chart Sivan. Dr. Foster contributed her knowledge of xenobiology to understand how alien consciousness might differ from human minds. Amy set aside her pride to help Rebecca, provided the engineering expertise to build the quantum bridge hardware. The chief engineer finally understood the value of combining old and new methods. The test would determine not just humanity's survival, but also Harold's legacy. The old engineer had spent his life believing in quantum consciousness, and now everything depended on proving it as they worked together. Harold felt hope for the first time since the crisis began. Perhaps the young people could learn to value wisdom along with innovation. The Kethmori watched their efforts through quantum sensors. The aliens were genuinely curious to see if humanity could pass a test no other species had attempted. Time was running out, and the fate of Earth hung in the balance. Harold knew that success would require the perfect fusion of his lifetime work with cutting-edge science. President Maria Rodriguez arrived at the station as news of the alien ultimatum spread across Earth. The 50-year-old leader had dark hair streaked with gray and carried the weight of humanity. Future Dr. Carol Jensen came with the presidential delegation bringing decades of experience in quantum research. The 60-year-old scientist had worked with Harold in the early days and still believed in his methods. The Keth Mori transmitted detailed specifications for the quantum consciousness bridge. The challenge required creating a stable connection between human and alien minds. Without losing individual identity, Harold studied the alien requirements with growing concern. The test was more complex than anything he had imagined, requiring perfect fusion of theory and practice. Price worked alongside Harold to translate the alien mathematics into human terms. Helen discovered that the Keth Mori used consciousness equations that were centuries ahead of human understanding. Katie, between the different teams, as more scientists arrived to help, the communications officer had become Harold's primary assistant and translator for the quantum patterns. President Rodriguez spoke with Admiral Thompson about evacuation plans. Maria knew that billions of lives hung in the balance and wanted backup options if the test failed. Dr. Jensen examined Harold's original research notes and was amazed by their depth. Carol had forgotten how brilliant his early work had been before politics and funding drove them apart. The alien ship began transmitting additional consciousness patterns that served as examples of successful bridges. The Keth Mori showed how other species had failed this same test. Sophia Clark mapped the quantum resonance points around Earth, finding locations where the bridge could be anchored. The navigator worked with precision born of desperation. Rebecca Davis supervised construction of the bridge hardware using designs that combined Harold classical theories with modern engineering. The systems had to be perfect. Dr. Foster analyzed the alien consciousness patterns, looking for psychological insights into how the Keth Mori minds functioned. Amy brought her xenobiology expertise to the challenge. The first attempt to create a small test bridge failed when the quantum fields collapsed. Harold realized they were missing something fundamental about consciousness interaction. Br. Price suggested that the problem might be in the harmonic frequencies. Helen noticed that human consciousness operated on different quantum wavelengths than alien minds. Harold returned to his oldest notebooks, searching for equations he had written 40 years ago. The solutions might lie in his earliest and most theoretical where Carol Jensen helped Harold remember experiments they had conducted together decades before. The old research held clues about consciousness resonance that modern science had forgotten. Katie monitored the quantum channels and noticed the Keth Mori were becoming impatient. The aliens transmitted warnings that time was running short for humanity. President Rodriguez addressed the station crew and explained what failure would mean. Maria made it clear that surrender was not an option, but urged everyone to support Harold. The breakthrough came when Harold realized that consciousness bridges required emotional resonance, not just mathematical precision. The connection had to feel right, as well as calculate correctly. Their Foster contributed her understanding of xenopsychology to help design emotional interfaces with the alien minds. Amy finally accepted that science included more than just logic. Rebecca engineered new quantum resonators based on Harold consciousness theories. The hardware had to respond to thought and feeling as well as electrical sickness. Sophia calculated the exact coordinates where Earth quantum field would align with the alien ship. The bridge required perfect timing to synchronize with natural resonance cycles. Price developed the mathematical framework that could sustain a consciousness bridge without destroying either mind. Helen worked day and night to solve impossible equations. The second test attempt created a brief connection that lasted 3 seconds. Before collapsing, Harold felt the alien consciousness touch his mind and was overwhelmed by its vastness. Carol Jensen suggested that the bridge needed multiple anchors to prevent collapse. The consciousness connection was too powerful for any single mind to sustain. Alone, Harold proposed that the entire team should link their minds together to share the load of contacting the Keth Mori collective. The solution required unprecedented cooperation. Dr. Foster worried about the psychological dangers of connecting human minds to an alien collective. Amy feared that the team members might lose their individual identities. Katie volunteered to be the first test subject for the multi-mind bridge, The young officer trusted Harold completely and was willing to risk everything for humanity. The third attempt involved linking Katie and Harold consciousness together before reaching out to the aliens. The connection worked, but required constant concentration to maintain. Reported that the quantum hardware was stable enough for a full-scale bridge attempt. The engineering systems could handle the power requirements for extended contact. President Rodriguez gave final approval for the full consciousness bridge test. Maria understood the risks but knew that failure meant extinction for the human race. Dr. Price calibrated the quantum frequencies for maximum stability, while Harold prepared his mind for contact with the vast alien collective. Helen had done everything possible. Method positioned the station at the exact coordinates where quantum resonance would be strongest. The navigator had calculated the perfect moment for bridge activation. The entire team linked their consciousness together using Harold techniques. Each person maintained their identity while sharing mental energy with the others. Harold felt his mind expand as the bridge connected with the Kethmori collective. The alien consciousness was like touching an ocean of ancient wisdom and memory. The aliens tested the bridge by sharing memories of their lost civilization. Harold experienced the death of entire worlds and understood the Kethmori desperate mission. Carol Jensen helped stabilize the connection. When Harold's mind began to waver under the alien contact, the old scientist provided the mental anchor he needed to continue. Dr. Foster experienced alien emotions and was amazed by their depth and complexity. Amy realized that the Kethmori were not cold collectors, but grieving survivors. The bridge held stable for 10 minutes before the team had to disconnect to prevent mental exhaustion. Harold had successfully created the first human-alien consciousness link. The Kethmori transmitted their evaluation of the test through quantum channels. Their message would determine whether humanity lived or joined their preserved collection. Harold waited for the alien judgment, knowing that he had done everything possible to save his species. The old engineer felt the eyes of the world upon him. The Kethmori consciousness filled the quantum channels with complex harmonics that Harold slowly translated. The alien collective was debating among themselves about humanity, fate. Dr. Price monitored the quantum fields and detected emotional undertones. In the alien communication, Helen realized the Kethmori were not as unified as they appeared. Katie helped Harold interpret the alien messages while maintaining the consciousness bridge. The young officer had become skilled at reading quantum, emotional patterns. The debate within the alien collective centered on whether humanity had truly passed their test. Some Kethmori minds argued for preservation, while others supported freedom. Harold sensed ancient disagreements within the alien collective. The Kethmori had been preserving civilizations for so long they had forgotten other possibilities. President Rodriguez waited anxiously for the alien decision while coordinating global communications. Maria had to keep Earth calm while the future remained uncertain. Jensen worked with Harold to strengthen the consciousness bridge. Carol understood that continued contact might influence the alien debate in humanity favor. The Kethmori finally reached consensus and transmitted their judgment. Through the quantum link, Harold felt the collective mind focus on him with unprecedented intensity. The aliens revealed that the test had multiple layers beyond the technical challenge. They had been evaluating how humans treated wisdom and respected different generations. Harold was shocked to learn that his own experience was the real test. The aliens had watched how younger humans dismissed his knowledge and expertise. The Kethmori explained that most civilizations destroyed themselves by abandoning the wisdom of their elders. Young minds pursued innovation while forgetting fundamental truths. Humanity unique response to the crisis had impressed the alien collective. The way Harold's team combined old and new knowledge showed unprecedented wisdom integration. Dr. Foster publicly apologized to Harold for her arrogance and dismissive attitude. Amy acknowledged that her pride had nearly doomed the entire human race. Rebecca Davis also admitted her mistakes in undervaluing Harold's experience. The chief engineer asked Harold to lead the quantum consciousness project going forward. The Kethmori transmitted a new message that changed everything. They offered humanity partnership instead of preservation. Earth could join their mission too. Preserve knowledge. Harold translated the incredible offer with trembling hands. The aliens wanted humans to help them find alternatives to their current preservation methods. The collective revealed that they had been searching for a species that could balance innovation with wisdom. Humanity had demonstrated this rare combination. Katie asked if the partnership would require joining the alien collective. Harold learned that humans could maintain their physical existence while sharing consciousness. Technology. Price was amazed by the scientific opportunities the partnership offered. Helen could study quantum consciousness with teachers who had perfected the technique. Sophia calculated the implications of joining a galactic civilization. The navigator realized that humanity would gain access to knowledge from millions of worlds. President Rodriguez authorized acceptance of the alien partnership. Maria understood that this opportunity would transform human civilization forever. Kethmori's ship began a remarkable transformation. The massive vessel reconfigured itself into a new shape that resembled a human figure kneeling in space. Harold watched in wonder as the 15-kilometer ship literally knelt before Earth. The gesture was unmistakable recognition and respect for human wisdom. The alien collective transmitted feelings of joy and hope through the quantum bridge. They had been alone for so long that finding partners felt like resurrection. Jensen helped Harold establish permanent communication protocols with the Kethmori. Carol worked to ensure the consciousness bridge could operate continuously. Aliens shared their vast libraries of preserved knowledge with human scientists. Information from countless civilizations flowed through the quantum channels. Harold found himself appointed as Earth primary liaison to the Kethmori collective. The old engineer who had been mocked now spoke for his entire species. Katie became Harold's assistant and eventual successor, ensuring that the knowledge bridge would continue beyond his lifetime. The young officer embraced her new role. Foster transformed from skeptic to student, asking Harold to teach her quantum consciousness techniques. Amy wanted to understand everything she had previously dismissed. Rebecca worked with alien engineers to upgrade Earth technology using principles from thousands of advanced civilizations. The collaboration produced incredible innovations. The Kethmori began teaching humans about other surviving civilizations scattered across the galaxy. Earth was no longer alone in the universe. Harold established an academy where ancient human wisdom was taught alongside alien knowledge. Students learned to value both tradition and innovation. The old engineer realized that his lifetime work had led to humanity's greatest achievement. First contact had succeeded because wisdom was valued over arrogance. President Rodriguez announced the partnership to Earth population. Maria explained how respecting knowledge and experience had saved the human race. Price published papers on consciousness physics that revolutionized human understanding. Helen credited Harold with opening the door to impossible science. Sophia charted courses to other worlds where humans could meet preserved civilizations. The navigator planned humanity first journeys to distant stars. The Kethmori collective began changing their mission from preservation to restoration. They worked with humans to find ways to revive stored civilizations. Harold felt deep satisfaction as he watched young and old humans working together. The generational divide that had almost doomed Earth was finally healing. Carol Jensen became director of consciousness research, working to expand human understanding. The field that Harold had pioneered alone was now a major science. The alien ship remained near Earth as a symbol of the new partnership. Its kneeling configuration reminded everyone that respect and wisdom had triumphed. Katie took over daily communications with the Kethmori as Harold aged. The young officer had learned his techniques and would carry them into the future. Foster developed new theories, combining xenobiology with consciousness physics. Amy had become one of Harold's most dedicated students and collaborators. Rebecca built quantum consciousness facilities across Earth, allowing millions of humans to experience the expanded awareness. The technology spread rapidly. Harold spent his final years teaching at the academy. He had founded the old engineer, passed on not just technical knowledge but wisdom about respecting all minds. The Kethmori Collective honored Harold with a special place in their consciousness matrix. When his physical body died, his mind joined the vast alien library. Earth continued to grow and learn under Kethmori guidance. Humanity had found its place among the stars through wisdom, rather than conquest. The old engineer who had been mocked and dismissed had become the savior of his species. Harold's legacy lived on in every human who learned to value both progress and tradition. The alien ship remained kneeling in space, a permanent reminder that respect for wisdom and knowledge was the key to survival and greatness.